Good evening. We are back to the study of the Spirit's book. We are on chapter 5 of book 2. We started last week on this question 222, which is not a question, is a dissertation by Kardec. It's a long dissertation, 8 pages. So we divided in 4 parts. Philip read the first part when we discussed a little bit last week, and we are going to start on the second part. It talks about reincarnation. Studied a little bit talks about reincarnation in the old times, that reincarnation was not something that was invented, created, or discovered by Spiritism. It's a concept that exists since the very ancient times. The Vedas talk about it, the Hindus talk about it, and even in Christianity, you find mentions of it, and we are going to see later Jesus mentioning it. Of course, the word reincarnation, as I mentioned last week, was a word coined by Kardec. Before it was used rebirth, resurrection, and other different words. But the word coming back to a new physical body, the concept reincarnation, the name reincarnation, not the concept, the name reincarnation, the word reincarnation was created by Kardec. He codified Spiritism. Okay? Philip, start on "we sometimes hear," please.
We sometimes hear people say, God, who is supremely good, cannot force a human being to restart a series of trials filled with anguish and tribulations. Is there more kindness in sentencing people to eternal suffering for a few moments of error than in giving them the means to make amends for their faults? 2 manufacturers each had a worker who hoped to one day become their employer's partner. However, both workers wasted their day and deserved to be fired. One of the manufacturers dismissed the bad worker, despite heartfelt pleas. This working person was unable to obtain any other employment and died of poverty. The other manufacturer said to the worker, "You have wasted a day. You owe me compensation for the loss you have caused me. You have done your work poorly, and you owe me for it. Start over again. If you do a good job, I will not fire you, and you may still seek the higher position that I had promised you." Do we really need to ask which manufacturer was proven to be the most humane? Would God, the paradigm of mercy itself, be more inflexible than a just and compassionate person? The idea that our actions for a few years decide our fate for eternity, in spite of the fact that we could not reach perfection while we were on earth, fills the mind with anguish. Meanwhile, the opposite idea is incredibly consoling, as it gives us hope, without choosing a side for or against multiple lives, and without admitting that either hypothesis is preferable. We contend that no one would prefer, if the matter were left to his or her own choice, to sustain a sentence against which there is no appeal. A philosopher once said, "If God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent one." That is what we could say about the concept of multiple lives. As we have already stated, God does not ask our permission when creating divine plans, nor does God consult our preferences. Things either are or they are not. We will now investigate the probability and consider the topic from a different perspective, the philosophical point of view. We will not include any teachings imparted by the spirits. If reincarnation does not exist, it means we have only one corporal life. If the present corporal life is the only one we're going to have, then each person's soul is created at the same time as his or her bodies. However, if we assume the pre-existence of the soul, we need to determine the state of the soul before it is united with the body. If the soul existed before the body, we must establish whether this state of being constitutes an existence. There is no middle ground. Either the soul existed before its union with the body, or it did not. If it existed, what was its condition? Did it possess self-awareness? If not, it must have been nearly comparable to non-existence. If it possessed individuality, it must have been either progressive or stationary. In either case, what was its degree of advancement upon uniting with the body? If, on the contrary, we assume that the soul is born into existence at the same time as the body, or that prior to the birth of the body, it possesses only negative faculties, we have to ask the following questions. Number one, why do souls have such a diversity of aptitudes independent of the ideas acquired by education? Number two, from where does the special aptitude for certain arts and sciences exhibited by many children at a very young age originate, while others remain inferior or mediocre for their entire lives? Number three, from where do some individuals derive the innate or intuitive ideas that others lack? Number four, from where do some children derive an instinctual gravitation toward vice or virtue, or innate senses of dignity or wrongdoing, which often contrasts with the circumstances into which they were born? Number five, why is it that some people, independent of education, are more advanced than others? Number six, why is it that some human beings are primitive and others civilized? If you took a Kwai-Kyo baby from its mother's breast and raised it in our most renowned schools, could you successfully make this baby a Laplace or Newton? We would ask, what philosophy or theosophy can resolve these problems? Either the souls of human beings are equal at birth or not. That we cannot doubt. If they are equal, why are there so many different aptitudes? Do they depend on the physical attributes of each child? This would be the most unfair and immoral hypothesis, because in that case, it makes a person a mere machine. People would not be responsible for their actions, but would have the right to place all the blame for their wrongdoings on the imperfections of their physical structure. If, on the other hand, souls are created unequal, God must have created them this way. In that case, why is this inherent superiority granted to some and denied to others? Would such partiality be consistent with God's justice and the equal love God gives to all creatures?
Thanks. So, Kardec here first approaches from the belief in God, who is supremely good and just, approach, asking if God, who is supremely good, cannot force a human being to start a series of trials, questioning, right? Which is a very common question by those that do not believe in reincarnation and question the existence of God, right? And again, it's a question that makes sense for someone that does not believe that we live multiple lives. Why there's so much difference, so many different people on earth? And if there is a God, why God would condemn someone that led a life that was born in a difficult life and fell prey to the imperfections of that physical life, be condemned eternally to hell or to purgatory? And then he gives an example of two manufacturers, which is, you know, a very radical example. Both didn't do anything. One it's fired, dies of poverty, and the other receives another chance. But what he's trying to say is, if we here, humans, imperfect humans, some of us are prone to give opportunities, to accept mistakes of others, of our brothers and sisters, and give them more opportunities and forgive, how can we think of a God that is all powerful and all just that wouldn't do that? So would God, as it says here, the paradigm of mercy, be more inflexible than a just and compassionate people? So that is all to question, again, the logic of reincarnation. Because if we all start the physical life from different positions according to our own degree of evolution, and the challenges and difficulties that we face in our lives are either consequences of what we have done in the past or opportunities for us to grow, again, it makes sense. You don't really have to believe in anything beyond the ordinary. Just have to try to reason and to think logically, and it makes sense. It explains, right? You may not accept the explanation, refuse to believe, but that's a different story. But you cannot argue that it makes sense, that we would come to a new life with the baggage that we carry from our previous existences, and we are facing the consequences and new challenges to continue our growth. So, as he says, it's an idea that gives us hope. We are proposing the idea that we all will have opportunities to learn from our mistakes, to repair the mistakes, and to continue growing. Voltaire is the philosopher that said, if God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent one, which is, in my opinion, a brilliant phrase, right? And very, very true. So then Kardec goes into the other side, right? Let's think if we have only one corporeal life. So if we have only one corporeal life, we either have been created at the moment of birth, or we come from somewhere. So if it comes from somewhere, what was before the life? And why suddenly, he doesn't ask this, but I'm proposing this. Why suddenly we are being born now, or our great-grandparents 100 and 150 years ago, people in the 1500s? Why, right? And where were we before? Again, if you believe that we are created equal and our life begins at the birth of the physical body, then the problem becomes after, right? Why goes back to why so many differences? Why some people are born in rich families, some people are born in poor families? Why some people are born in advanced countries, some people are born in very underdeveloped countries? Why some people have perfect health and some people have a lot of diseases? why some people live longer and some people die young without having the opportunity of learning much. This is all the whys that don't have an answer if there is only one incarnation. You can create a lot of excuses, but you don't really have logical answers, right? If you start trying to find logical. And then Kardec continues with philosophical questions, right? Why do souls have such a diversity of aptitudes, right? From where does it comes? All these questions that if we bring the concept of previous existences, we have answers for all the questions. And we have answers for more questions. And we have explanations. It doesn't mean that everybody's going to be happy with the explanations, because you can always, because then it brings the other question. If I have to go through this, why don't I remember my past lives? Why I'm going through such a difficult time and others are not. Of course, there is always a lot of questions that we are going to have, and that sometimes we won't find the answers on our particular cases, right? Because what Spiritism tries to bring to us are general answers, the general understanding of us as eternal spirits. But each individual has its own personal journey that has, it didn't start in this incarnation. It didn't start recently on the last one, started a long number of incarnations ago, and with that, an accumulation of things that we did, positive and negative. And we focus a lot on the negative things, right? But we have to remember that we also did positive things. We also built good relationships, and we have the ones around us that care for us, both incarnates and discarnates, to prove that we made good actions during our incarnations. So it's all philosophical discussions, right? This koi koi baby here, it's a general name from the people of the Cape in South Africa, the name they use for themselves, Kwena, Koi Koi, or Khoikhene. The word can be translated to mean the real people, or man of man, mean we people with domestic animals, as opposed to Songkhla or Bushmen who had none. This is an explanation from the United States Spiritist Federation. But what Kardec is trying to say here, and remember, this is a question from 1857, right? So put in perspective when he was asked. When someone, you take a baby from a primitive tribe and take it to civilization and educate the baby in a regular school, can you successfully make the baby a Laplace or a Newton? Yes, it can, because it depends on the previous knowledge and conditions of the baby, right? Because the fact that he was born there in a tribe is not significant to what level of evolution this baby is. At the same time, you have people born in very wealthy families, have all the conditions of good education and all the opportunities, and end up being even criminals, right? Abusing their position, abusing their power, abusing other people. So it's a philosophical part that Kardec goes here to discuss the logic of reincarnation, which is what we are discussing here. Okay? Questions, comments? Okay, so now let's talk about admitting the existence of multiple lives.
On the contrary, if we admit the existence of multiple lives, everything is easily explained. At birth, human beings possess the level of insight that they acquired previously, They are more or less advanced, depending on the number of lives they have previously had and how close or far they are from the common starting point. This is similar to how in a company made up of individuals of different ages, each person has a degree of development and experience proportionate to the number of years lived. The succession of years for the life of the body is equivalent to what the succession of lives is for the life of the soul. Imagine that 1,000 people of every age, from an infant to an 80-year-old, were brought together in one place at the same time. Suppose that their past is hidden from you, and you, in your ignorance, imagine them all to have been born on the same day. You would naturally wonder how some are big and some are small. Some are old while others are young. Some are educated and others are ignorant. But if their past was revealed and you discovered that some had lived longer than others, all these differences would be explained. God, out of divine justice, could not create souls either more or less perfect. Given our multiple corporal lives, the differences in qualities that we see around us is still consistent with strict equality because everything has roots, not in the present, but in the past. Is this reasoning based on any preconceived system or hypothesis? No. Instead, it is founded upon the clear and undeniable fact that natural aptitudes, in addition to intellectual and moral development, are all different. This cannot be explained by any current theory. While the explanation is simple, natural, and rational by using a new theory, does it make sense to prefer a theory that does not explain this fact over one that does? In regard to the sixth question, one will quickly dismiss the Khoikhoi as an inferior race. To this, we simply ask whether a Khoikhoi is or is not a human being. If it is a human being, why has God denied it the privileges granted to the Caucasian race? If it is not a human being, why try to make it Christian? Spiritist philosophy is much more wide-ranging than all of that, because it acknowledges that there are not several species of human beings, but only humans as a whole, and only recognizes human beings whose spirituality is more or less backward, but who are all capable of the same progress. This view of the human race is more in line with the concept of God's justice, is it not? We have considered the soul in regard to its past and its present. If we now consider it in terms of the future, we encounter further difficulties that modern theories still cannot explain. Number one, if our future destiny is to be decided solely by our present life, what will be the respective positions of the savage and the civilized person in the future? Will they be on the same level, or will there be a difference in their level of eternal happiness? Number two, will the individuals who have tirelessly worked their entire life to achieve moral and intellectual improvement be placed at the same rank as others who have remained at a lower point of moral and intellectual improvement, not through their own fault, but because they had neither the time nor the opportunity to advance? Number three, can individuals who have done wrong because they have not been able to enlighten themselves be held responsible for a state of affairs which did not depend upon them? Number four, we strive to enlighten, moralize, and civilize all humans, but for each individual that we are able to successfully educate, There are millions who die every year without ever seeing the light. What is their fate? Should they be treated as sinners? If not, how have they deserved the same treatment as others? Number 5, what is the fate of children who die before they have been able to do either good or bad? If they are welcomed among the purest spirits, why have they been given this standing without having done anything to deserve it? Why are they exempted from suffering the tribulations of the physical life? What current doctrine can solve these problems? If we acknowledge our consecutive lives, all these problems are solved in compliance with divine justice. What we are unable to complete or do in one life, we accomplish in another. Thus, no one escapes the law of progress. Everyone is rewarded according to his or her own merit, and no one is excluded from the ultimate attainment of supreme happiness, regardless of the obstacles they must overcome on the journey to get there.
Thanks, Philip. Okay, so here Kardec is first with the concept of multiple lives, right? It says that the concept of multiple lives and reincarnations makes everything easier to explain and understand, because when we are born, we bring with us all the moral qualities and imperfections that we have and the intellectual development necessary for that incarnation. We are more or less advanced depending on the number of lives we lived. So, you know, the explanation of multiple lives, it's a easy way to explain the differences that we find amongst ourselves. It helps us explain people in different places, in different situations, in different countries, different races, different religions. It's the necessity of each individual based on their own personal journey. Kardec then goes to example, if someone, you put 1,000 people of every age and different ages to explain the concept of reincarnation, right? When you say that they were born at different times, then you understand the differences between them. And then he goes back to the Khoikhoi. And again, we have to remember this is the middle of the 18th century, where the general thought is that there were races that were inferior races in terms of development. There are still slaves in this country here in the US. There were still slaves in some places in the world. So those that had slaves considered the slaves an inferior race. So Kardec is discussing the concept here that Spiritism brings a new concept, that we are all human beings and all have the same rights and the same responsibilities. We are just different on our level of evolution, but we are all capable of the same progress, and that is much more according to God's justice. And then he talks a little bit about future lives, right? Talking about the future. And then he has some questions, again, philosophical questions. If the future is decided only by this life, how can you have different positions of the primitive and the civilized people in the future compared to the eternal happiness? And then again, why some individuals that work hard their entire lives will be placed in the same rank as others that haven't made much of an effort? What about those individuals that didn't do any wrong because they haven't been able to didn't have time to do anything wrong, or have done wrong because they haven't been able to enlighten themselves? What about those that we don't have the opportunity to help educate? The fate of children who die before they've been able to do either good or bad. So he's talking about our position back in the spiritual world, and to explain the different positions. Nowadays, with the studies that we have complementary to the studies of Spiritism in the books of André Luiz and other spiritual books, we learn about the different places we find ourselves in the spiritual world, different situations according to our own personal progress. But what Kardec is trying to bring here is more on the philosophical discussion and logical discussion of the concept of reincarnation. Okay, and he asks, where else can you find such detailed explanations? And I was talking to a friend this week, and I asked him the same thing, because he researches a lot of philosophies and religions, different ones. I asked him, do you find any that explains as well as Spiritism explains everything? And he said, no, I couldn't find it so far. So I told him, keep looking. Maybe you'll find, but I haven't, but I'm not looking. I'm happy with what Spiritism brings to me, the concepts. But, that's the thing, that the gift that Spiritism brings to us is all this knowledge. The responsibility that is upon each one of us is, what do we do with this knowledge? Because we cannot claim ignorance when we are returning back to the spiritual world, because we know what do we do with this knowledge is on each one of us. It's our own personal responsibility on our spiritual journey. We had this opportunity of learning that Spiritism brings to us, that a lot of people in the world never heard of Spiritism and never heard of these concepts that Spiritism bring. There are many of the concepts that Spiritism brings is spread in different beliefs, but not everything together. Philosophy, science, and religious or moral aspect as we find in Spiritism. So, it's how they say in the movie, the more with great knowledge comes great responsibility, right? That was a phrase in one of these superhero movies. Okay.
Questions related to this subject may be infinitely multiplied, because the psychological and moral problems that can only be solved by the theory of multiple lives are innumerable. In this work, we have restricted our examination to the most general issues. Some detractors may maintain that whatever the arguments in its favor, reincarnation is not acknowledged by the Church, and its acceptance would therefore not only conflict religious doctrine, but utterly decimate it as well. Our objective is not to discuss the implications of this subject, but rather to highlight the exceedingly moral and rational character of the theory. On the contrary, we may confidently contend that a moral and rational doctrine cannot possibly be antagonistic to a religion that proclaims the divine being to be the paradigm of goodness and reason. What would have happened to the Church if, in opposition to scientific research and the discoveries of humanity, it had continued to resolutely reject overwhelming evidence, thus ostracizing anyone who did not believe in the movement of the sun around the earth or the 6 days of creation? how would enlightened nations have retained any shred of credibility if they continued to champion a religious system that taught such obvious errors as steadfast beliefs? Whenever any evidence has been established conclusively, the Church has sensibly supported this evidence. If the facts of human life are proved to be irreconcilable without reincarnation, if certain points of church dogma can only be explained by such means, the Church will be forced to acknowledge its truth. It will have to confess that the apparent antagonism between these two arguments is superficial. Religion has no more to fear from the acceptance of this doctrine than from the discovery of the Earth's movement and geologic time periods, which outwardly appear to contradict the sacred texts. In reality, reincarnation is implied in many passages of the scriptures and is explicitly noted in the Gospels. As they were coming down from the mountain, Jesus charged them, "Tell no one about the vision until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." Then his disciples asked him, "Why do the scribes say that Elijah must come first?" He said in reply, "Elijah will indeed come and restore all things, but I tell you that Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but did to him whatever they please. So also will the Son of Man suffer at their hands." Then the disciples understood that he was speaking to them of John the Baptist, Matthew 17, verses 9 through 13. Since John the Baptist was Elijah, this implies that Elijah's spirit or soul must have reincarnated in the body of John the Baptist. Whatever your opinion about reincarnation is, regardless of whether we accept it or reject it, we will, if it exists, have no choice but to experience it. The crucial point here is that the Spirit's teachings are predominantly Christian. They are founded on the concepts of the immortality of the soul, future rewards and atonements, God's justice, free will, and Christ's moral code. For that reason, it cannot be considered anti-religious. We have discussed this subject without referring to any of the Spirit's statements because they do not constitute an official authority for many people. If we, and so many others, have adopted the belief in multiple lives, it is not simply because the spirits have preached it. The reason is that it is rational and resolves inconsistencies that would otherwise be impossible to explain. If a person suggested it to us, we would adopt it assuredly and quickly. We would renounce our preconceived notions because when there is proof that an opinion is flawed, even self-love has more to lose than to gain if it clings to it stubbornly. Likewise, we would reject the theory of reincarnation if it appeared to conflict with reason, even if preached by the spirits, just as we have rejected many other ideas they suggested. We have learned by experience that we cannot blindly accept ideas suggested by spirits or people alike. The biggest advantage in support of reincarnation is that it is incredibly rational. It also has the confirmation of facts, both positive and material, that are clear to all who study the subject patiently and purposefully. This eradicates any possibility of doubt as to the reality of reincarnation. When this affirmation becomes widespread, those who currently oppose it will be forced to relinquish their opposition. This is precisely what happened with ideas concerning the formation and rotation of the earth. In summary, the theory of multiple lives is the only one that explains what is otherwise inexplicable. It is comforting, and it complies with the concept of fair justice perfectly. It is the life preserver that God throws to humanity. The words of Jesus leave no doubt regarding this last statement. As we read in the 3rd chapter of the Gospel according to John, verse 3, Jesus replied to Nicodemus, "Very truly I tell you, no one can see the kingdom of God unless they are born again." Verse 4, Nicodemus said to him, "How can someone be born when they are old? Surely they cannot enter a second time into their mother's womb to be born." Verse 5, Jesus answered, "Very truly I tell you, no one can enter the kingdom of God unless they are born of water and spirit. Flesh gives birth to flesh, but the Spirit gives birth to spirit. You should not be surprised at my saying, you must be born again." John 3, chapters 3 through 7.
Thanks. Okay, so here Kardec goes to the religious part of it. Okay, first, how a reincarnation should be accepted and understood by the church. And when he talks about the church here, of course, he's talking about the Catholic Church, which was prevalent in France in the middle of the 19th century, and where that was creating, again, not at the time that Kardec was writing the Spirit's book, codifying the Spiritism, but later created all sorts of problems for Spiritism, and that in many places and in many instances continues until the present day, right? So Kardec first says that the argument that the reincarnation is not acknowledged by the church and would conflict with the religious doctrine, Kardec is saying that it will only do so by those that refuse to entertain and discuss the idea, because the idea is moral and rational, the theory. So if someone studies it rationally, they will have to accept the idea. Again, they haven't yet. So 150 years later, or 60, still the church doesn't accept the concept of reincarnation in the majority of cases. I know that from good sources that there are religious people that accept the concept of reincarnation and even discuss the concept, some openly, some amongst themselves. I know that in Brazil there are some religious people from the Catholic Church that read the Spirit's book and studies the Spirit's book, but they would never admit to that, right? But we have a nun in Brazil that participates in a lot of Spiritist meetings and lectures and discussions, and she's it's very interesting to hear from her. Again, she brings the concepts of the Catholic Church, but conciliates the teachings of Spiritism. Sister Aila is her name. So again, of course, the truth is universal and the truth will prevail. The church opposed for many centuries the concept that Earth was not the center of the universe. And eventually they had to accept it and they had to change. Kardec is very kind to the church here, talking about the church has sensibly supported the evidence. The church has resisted to a lot of the evidences that are brought outside the church, but it has to end up accepting, because the truth is the truth, And even if they don't accept now, eventually they will accept. Many people ask why those, these religious people that don't believe in reincarnation go back to the spiritual world. Will they start believing in reincarnation? Not necessarily is the answer, right? You can be as closed as you are here to new ideas, and you won't be listening to anyone that talks about reincarnation, but they will reincarnate without being aware of what's happening to them, and eventually they'll be reincarnated. And then he talks about the Gospels, right? That first, that Jesus talks about reincarnation when he was coming down from the mountain where he had this transfiguration, and he met Elijah and he met Moses. And the disciples asked him if Elijah must come first, as the scribes say. And Jesus said that Elijah had already come. And they understand it's John the Baptist, that is Elijah reincarnated. So if Jesus said that Elijah had to come again, means that Jesus was talking about reincarnation. What else could have been talking? Why would Elijah have the privilege of come back and not the others? So that's what Jesus was telling them, that Elijah's spirit or soul must have reincarnated. And again, Jesus didn't use the word, he used the words born again in the body of John the Baptist. And then he talks, finally Kardec talks about the concept coming or not from the spirits, that would make no difference. And here's something important that Kardec says. If he has come from the spirits or he has come from incarnate people, it doesn't matter. What matters is the reason and the rationality of it, and how it resolves inconsistencies that will be otherwise impossible to explain. And he makes very clear that not everything that comes from the spirits should be trusted, because, as we know very well, spirits are just us on the other side. So if we have someone that is a pseudo-wise here that thinks they know everything, and they go back to the spiritual world, they'll continue to think they know everything, and will try to talk about it.
In this case, so that means when they reject many other ideas, they suggest it means like inferior spirits?
Yeah, what Kardec is saying here is that he received communications from spirits from all over the world, and from very different mediums. And he said that he rejected many other ideas that came from the spirits. The Kardec's method of working was, if something came from only one medium, one spirit, even if it made sense to him, he wouldn't accept it without confirmation from different mediums from other places and other spirits. Only when it made sense and came from more than one spirit, he would accept and eventually put in the word. So that's what he meant here. A lot of the suggestions he received, some rejected because they were not reasonable, they didn't make sense, or if they were only ideas that he only received from one spirit, one medium, he didn't publish. And actually there is a work that is not translated into English called Posthumous Work, that was not done by Kardec, but was done by his followers with material found in his desk and everything. There is a lot of things there that you can question if Kardec would have published that or not. And so for people that read these posthumous works, we always say that don't take everything as they were accepted by Kardec, because some of them Kardec received, kept, but he may not would have published that if he had continued his work. And then he ends talking about this passage from the conversation with Jesus with Nicodemus. For those that watch the series The Chosen, there is this passage of Nicodemus meeting with Jesus and talking about this, right? When he asks how can we be born again if we have to come second time in the mother's womb? And Jesus said, very truly, I tell you, the flesh gives birth to flesh, but spirit gives birth to spirit. Meaning, the physical body comes from the parents, but the spirit inhabiting the physical body, it's a old spirit. It's a spirit giving birth to spirit in the sense that it continues to be a spirit. And Jesus says very clearly, you should not be surprised at me saying you must be born again. That's in John 3:37. So again, it's very clear in the Gospels, according to the original Gospel, the New Testament. But again, people will read and interpret the way that is convenient to them. So they will have different interpretations. Okay, we're done with this study of reincarnation, which is important if you are going to discuss. Brings you a lot of valid points, concepts, ideas to a discussion of reincarnation if it's necessary for you to have with someone else. Okay. Then next week we start chapter 6, which is spirit life, which is life in the spiritual world, which is a very interesting chapter also. Okay. Any final questions, comments? Today was only me talking. Okay.
I said something.
Me and Philip. Sorry, Philip participated.
No, I just read.
So this Sunday is the last Sunday of the month, so we'll have our Q&A session. Okay. This Saturday we have a very interesting lecture by our friend Rafael Rezende from Boston. He's going to talk about planetary transitions and cosmic cycles. You know, he's a scientist, so that should be a very interesting subject. The book club on beginning, we stopped at the beginning pages of chapter 2 of part 2. That's where we're going to start. The study of the Spiritist Group of Connecticut, which is every Thursday at noon, restarted today. So if you want to join, you can join every Thursday at noon. Okay? Zoraida, can you do our final prayer?
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
To our spiritual benefactors, our guardian angels, we give you thanks for the assistance of studies today in the considerations of the multiple lives, chapter 4. As Kardec explains the logic and understanding of reincarnation in multiple lives, explaining answers to philosophical questions and logic, who we are, who we really are. We pray, dear Lord, to our brothers and sisters in the physical and spiritual world in need. We send prayers to the hospitals and hospices, the orphanages in the undeveloped countries, to the war that continues, dear Lord, that brings so much suffering and pain to so many dear ones. May they never give up hope as we continue to send prayers of strength and charity. We pray, dear Lord, for our Spiritist Group of New York in all Spiritist centers. Grateful for the teachers that continue to inspire us each week. And to remember to join our study groups throughout the week with continuous studies. And may we continue throughout the week with our prayers and strength in our homes, for our families and loved ones who are in need of guidance and strength. We thank you, dear Lord, allowing us to gather here tonight and return again next week. And with this in mind, we ask permission to close our meeting today. So be it.